This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. By far the most riveting experience I've had in the theater this season was my trip to Al-Qaeda. And I'm so pleased that we have the man who wrote it and who performs it. I guess that's performing, certainly.
I have to laugh, though, Susan, when you say, by far my most riveting experience is my trip to Al-Qaeda, and you think, Susan, are you all right? Did you come back okay from your trip to Al-Qaeda?
So, to introduce him, Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Susan's right, My Trip to Al-Qaeda, a terrific one-man show down at the Culture Project by Lawrence Wright. It is based on reporting he has done for The New Yorker about Al-Qaeda and the Middle East and terrorism. Also collected in his award-winning book, The Looming Tower, and we're very happy to have with us tonight Lawrence Wright. Welcome to Theater Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you're not an actor by training.
Certainly not.
But you're starring in your own one-man show about your experiences reporting on terrorism and your trips through the Middle East. Why did you decide that you should perform this yourself and not, line up Tom Hanks or someone like that to play you in the part?
A smarter idea, now that you've mentioned it.
It'd be on Broadway.
About 15 years ago or something like that, somebody from David Hare's office contacted me, and he wanted to use a line that I'd written about Jerusalem for this play that he was working on, which
Via Dolorosa.
became Via Dolorosa. And I had a real mean-spirited thought, which was, I know a lot more about Jerusalem than he does, but at the same time I thought, what an interesting idea. And then I saw Anna Deavere Smith do Fires in the Mirror at the Public, and I was absolutely riveted by that because it was theater, but it was also journalism. And I've written plays before, and I am a journalist. I never had thought until I had these two experiences with David and with Anna Deavere Smith's work of combining them. And it suddenly seemed very fertile, like an interesting idea. I don't have the acting skills of anybody, anything like Anna Deavere Smith, but I did want to. I thought I could bring some of the authenticity of my own experience to the stage, and in that way, I think people would feel, even though I'm not a professional actor, that they're engaged with a person that actually did feel these things and did have these thoughts.
I mean, 99% of the time you're being you, and which is much more compelling, you as you, than
well, you're taking us by the hand and taking us on
Yeah.
these trips and these interviews and these subjects that you have explored.
Well, I'm trying to play myself convincingly, which is hard enough.
Now, you had some advice or encouragement from John Lahr, the theater critic, your colleague at the New Yorker, with this play. Did you show him the script? Did he give you sort of like...
all along the line, John was deeply implicated in this project. When I finished my book, I went in and I was visiting with John, and he said, well, what would you like to do now? And I said, John, actually, I'm kind of sick of terrorism. I'd like to write a musical comedy. And it was the furthest from, what I've been doing that I could think of. And I said, but I can't afford it. He said, well, get a commission. How would I do that? Well, I'll call Andre Bishop at the Lincoln Center. So he did. And I went over and visited with Andre, and he was completely uninterested in my musical idea.
What was the idea? What was, having spent so much of your life researching about terrorism, what musical would you have in mind?
The musical idea is about the making of the movie Cleopatra. With Liz and Dick, the
Mankiewicz movie, right?
Yes, the most scandalous romance of modern times against the most scandalous romance of historic times, and I just thought it was a funny idea. Andre did not, and but I mentioned in passing as we were finishing up the conversation that I'd had this notion that I might do a one-man play about my experiences looking into Al-Qaeda, and. He said, that's where your energy is. That's what you should do. And then I went back to the New Yorker, and I was visiting with Rhonda Sherman, who's the director of promotions there. And she said, I'll put it on in the New Yorker Festival. So I had a producer, and I had a deadline. I didn't have the first word written, but that's how it came about.
When did you first hear of what we all know now, Al-Qaeda? I mean, most of us had never even heard of this until the attack on the World Trade Center.
Sure.
When did you, though, when did you first hear of this organization?
Well, of course, there was the attack in 1998 on the embassy bombings in South Africa, in East Africa, and I was familiar with it then. Right after, but I had been researching Islamic extremism for a movie that I wrote called The Siege.
Yeah.
And it took...
Depression movie.
Yeah. I was researching it just before the embassy bombings. I was, 97, even 96, I think. I was researching the Islamic extremists who had bombed the World Trade Center and who were also active elsewhere in the world as a basis for this movie that became The Siege. Ironically, the movie came out the same year as the embassy bombings, when Al-Qaeda really began to launch its campaign against America.
And didn't someone say that they were retaliating?
Oh, you're
the siege?
thinking of
What am I thinking?
There was right after the embassy bombings. The embassy bombings was August 7th, 1998.
Yes.
On August 25th of that year, there was a bomb in a Planet Hollywood restaurant in Cape Town, South Africa. And
Right.
2 British tourists were killed, and a little girl lost her leg. And a radical Islamist group claimed credit, and they said that they were protesting the trailers that had appeared in theaters in America for The Siege, and they struck Planet Hollywood because Bruce Willis, one of the co-stars, was a partial owner of that restaurant chain.
And how did that, I mean, you discussed this in the play. I mean, what was
Yeah.
the impact on you when you heard that?
Oh, I was devastated. I mean, I didn't feel responsible for the terror,
No, sure.
but 2 people were dead because of something I had written, and it was very upsetting. I still have a hard time processing that. It's just one of those really miserable chapters in life, when there's nothing that you could have done differently, but still it's a bitter pill.
In The Siege, you predict Muslim fundamentalist attacks on New York City, terrorist attacks
Yeah.
on New York City, and how these lead to an abandonment of civil liberties by the American government. Just an amazing, as Michael said, prescient film, and at the time people probably thought it was preposterous and far-fetched.
Yeah, right, many did, and many Arabs and Muslims in this country were very offended by being stereotyped as terrorists, and so there were picketers around the theaters, and all the negative attention that was focused on the movie made it a box office failure, and it was the most rented movie in America after 9/11. I'm not happy about the fact that it was that prescient. And it was unsettling to me because when I was watching the events of 9/11 unfold, like many Americans, I thought, it looks like a movie.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking, no, it looks like my movie. And that was a really unsettling sensation.
But that informed you doing the work for the...
Yes.
And how so?
And it was very motivating in terms of doing the book because I felt now I need to find out what really happened.
Mm-hmm. When you were researching Al-Qaeda before the attack on the World Trade Center, when you were writing the movie, were you thinking really that sooner or later there is going to be some kind of attack in this country, or were you just saying, this is going to be the exaggerated Hollywood version of it that I'm going to do with the movie? Or did you really know or have a sense that sooner or later this terrorism was going to reach our shores again after the 93 bombing?
While I was researching it, I interviewed some of the FBI people here in New York in the counterterrorism division, and they were very certain then that it was going to happen again. And the movie reflects their anxiety. I mean, I thought, these guys are the experts, and they say it's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And I would never have gotten away with the kind of over-the-top things that really did happen. It would have been too Hollywood to try to portray the actual events. So it was, and the director Ed Zwick really wanted. I had made it more over the top than it actually was. He brought it down quite a lot to bus bombings, school bombings, those kinds of things, because they seemed at the time like a more realistic approach to what kind of terrorism might take place in this country.
And one of the most compelling parts of my trip to Al-Qaeda is you get yourself a job. What is it, mentoring?
Oh, that was in Saudi Arabia.
So in Saudi Arabia is the mentoring.
The Saudis wouldn't let me in as a reporter, and it was really upsetting because I'd had to write about bin Laden, and they weren't going to let me into the country for a year and 4 months. And so finally I took a job, and the job I was so fortunate to get was to be a mentor to young reporters in Jeddah, bin Laden's hometown.
Yeah.
And it was very chastening to me as a reporter to realize how much more of the story I understood because I wasn't there as a reporter. Instead of being in a hotel making calls, I was living in a middle-class Saudi flat. I had a car, I had a job, I had to go to work every day, and I had.
You were outside of the Western reporter's bubble.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as a consequence of that, I really got to know Saudi society in a much richer way.
Yeah, that is, to me, I mean, it was a very compelling evening in the theater. But your analysis of why the regime, the Saudi regime, exists, why it endures. You make the analogy when you were a young man in the South, the hypnotized roost chicken on the roof, on the ledge, which it's hypnotized, it's balanced there, it shouldn't be there, but it is.
Right.
That's what you concluded from the Saudi regime. By all rights, this regime should have been knocked down, should have fallen a long time ago.
Yeah.
It hasn't. Why hasn't it?
Fear.
Fear.
You know, the Saudis are afraid of what might happen.
Because they look around and they see what's happened in the
Egypt,
other countries.
in Iran, in Somalia, in Iraq.
And now Iraq.
Yeah, you know, change and progress don't go hand in hand necessarily in the Middle East. And so it's a miserable system in Saudi Arabia, but it's not as miserable as it could be. And so the idea of trying to make a change, there are a lot of progressives in Saudi Arabia, but they're really cautious because the stakes are so high. And I think that sometimes we don't appreciate how dangerous it really is.
When you were working with these young reporters in Saudi Arabia, did they have the concept that we have here in the West, that as a reporter you have to take yourself out of the experience and be a detached observer? Did they have that tension of being pilgrims themselves at the same time of having to step back and write about the pilgrims without having those feelings, without get caught up in the emotionalism of that?
It was very hard to do that in the Hajj because they're all, you know, they were all Muslims. They're all Wahhabis, and so you know, this is the most important story of the year for most of them, and they're very emotional about it, and they're very caught up in it. You know, the press tradition in all over the Arab world is very weak, and there's a lot that has to be learned. And my experience mentoring them was really rewarding, but sometimes I felt that I was teaching them skills they couldn't actually use.
Yeah. If they did it, they would be want to follow the regime.
You make the jaw-dropping point about that there's no cultural life. This is Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
That there's no cultural life, there's no information, there's nothing but religion and going to the mall. That's it.
The mall. I was saying there's no civil society.
Yeah, no civil society.
You know, there's no nightclubs, no movies, no plays, no theater, no dating. The internet's controlled. There are very few parks and museums.
The women are completely demeaned.
Yes, and the only thing that's left to them is shopping.
Yeah.
And the shopping is very serious. When the IKEA furniture store opened up in Jeddah, 15,000 people showed up, and 2 were trampled to death.
Yeah.
So there was such a thrilling event in Jeddah society that it was that diverting.
So you make a very compelling case for how this kind of fundamentalism can certainly take root and grow unabated. It's such a depressing thing you put before us. Do you see any hope?
I see some hope. One thing is, I should say that Al-Qaeda can't win because it really has no vision of the future.
Yeah.
It doesn't offer an alternative. It's really a reaction. It's not a movement in the sense of a political movement. It's a reaction. We have thousands and thousands of pages of Al-Qaeda documents. We even have their constitution, which is just as detailed as the Ladies' Garden Club, with how many committees and how many people are on it and what kind of education they have. We have their employment contract, which has, in the old days, health care, month-long paid vacation. It was a good job for a lot of guys.
Right.
We have all of this stuff, and military manuals, strategy sessions. There's not a single page in there about what they would do if they actually took over a country. They don't have any idea about that.
Yeah. Well, you make the point that it's about death.
Yeah, it's about purity. There are two things. The movement itself is really interested in purification of Islam, and it's not interested in government, but purification is really close to terror. And we saw that with the Taliban, and that was their model for government. is no government. But the young men who join it, for them, it's really a suicide machine. It authorizes them to kill themselves in the service of a higher calling. And if their own lives offer them so little, it's no way to be powerful in the world. Al-Qaeda gives them a chance to make history. All they have to do is die.
You also make the point that how the present occupation of Iraq by the American government seems to play into their hands. I don't think I'm putting words in your mouth.
No, I'm really, I lament the fact that we went into Iraq, because the war on terror was really over in December of 2001. After American and coalition troops went into Afghanistan, swept aside the Taliban, pummeled Al-Qaeda. By Al-Qaeda's own internal memoranda, they admit that 80% of their members were captured or killed. And yes, the leaders got away, but they were scattered, they were destitute, they were unable to communicate, they were feckless. They couldn't, they couldn't do anything. And there were some actions, but there was, they were really not central to the Al-Qaeda mothership. Iraq blew those embers back into flame. And now Al-Qaeda is spreading and is more fortified than it's been perhaps ever in its history. I'm very distressed by the actions that we've taken, because if we had stopped short, if we had just stopped with Afghanistan, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't be doing this play. All of these things I think would be over by now.
Is this play a sort of way of getting all of this out of your system, in the sense, you said earlier that you were talking to John Lahr, you said, I've spent a lot of time studying terror, not something that, not as much fun as covering Broadway, let's say.
Yeah.
Will you continue on this subject, or is there, part of your life now that you'd like to put this behind you and go on to investigate, report on other things? Or are you never going to get away from this world?
I'd like to get beyond it, but I seem to be kind of captivated by it. And I think it's so important, and it's not going away.
No, it's not going away.
It's something that we're going to be living with for a long time. And there's so few people that are really as versed in it. There's a handful of people, even in the government, that really know enough about this subject.
Do you have a little club of people who know too much, and it?
Yeah, it's very much like that. I'm sure we're going to have to go to the same old folks' home. Nobody else will want to talk to us.
Do you live in fear every day because you know so much more than we do, going about our normal lives? You know that there's more out there, there's more going to happen?
I don't live in fear, and I think that would be a mistake.
Yeah.
But I live with the knowledge that terrorism is a part of our lives now, and we have to accept that and try not to disrupt our society in the ways that we already have. I think that sacrifices we've made to our civil liberties and our system of justice have really hurt us. And people keep asking me if are we safer? And safety is something that you're always reaching for, but it's never really in your hands. It's, you don't have it. But in the process of reaching for it, we've negotiated away a lot of our liberties. I was in Philadelphia on my book tour, and I went to the Liberty Bell, which I hadn't been to for a long time. Now you have to go through a scanner. You empty your pockets. You take off your belt. You have to take off your shoes. Oh, we've come to the point where you have to take off your shoes to go visit the Liberty Bell. You can't go up in the Statue of Liberty. I know these are just symbols, but they represent real losses of the sense of freedom that we as Americans have always taken for granted.
But if the threat is out there, isn't there going to have to be some sort of compromise to fight the threat of terrorism in some way? Isn't there have to be a balance that's struck? It can't be business as usual, where everything's open with no metal detectors and that, because somebody could go in and put a bomb in the Liberty Bell.
Yeah.
Or in the subway.
My feeling is that this has been Laden's goal all along. He said to his followers, I don't have to appear on television to, terrorize Americans. All I have to do is make an action, commit a statement, and the Americans will terrorize themselves. Well, that's what we're doing. And there are other societies that have faced a lot more terrorism than we have, and they've learned to live with it, perhaps in a better way than we have.
Maybe we're feeling our way. I mean, maybe we have to kind of perhaps go a little too far in suspending civil liberties, phone tapping, as we're learning how to live in a society that's going to be confronting terrorism every day, and we will have to grow and evolve and find the balance for ourselves.
I think that we should do exactly as you say. We should grow and evolve, but we should do it within a legal framework. I think stepping outside the law, illegal wiretaps, torture, these kinds of things besmirch us as a society, shame us. And it's not just that we haven't failed to live up to our own standards as Americans. We've lost standing in the world because of it, and those things are real losses.
You should take the show on tour, because, you know, if you just play urban centers, you're going to be talking to people who are agreeing with you. It'd be good for you to do this in you're from Austin, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe not Austin, but
I did it in Dallas, and
what was the reaction like there?
They were really moved, and I take your point. I don't want to just do it to people, you know, in front of audiences that agree with me.
Yeah.
I think it's a conversation that I'm trying to engage in with the audience. My goal is to get people thinking about, you know, who are these people that attacked us? Why do they do that? But finally, who are we? And you know, how do we want to react to all of this? And these are questions that we really haven't talked about, you know, politically or as a society. And they're extremely important questions because we're changing without really talking about it.
One last thing. As we're taping this, it's been revealed that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has claimed responsibility for a list of, 21 crimes, and it's also said that they obtained this information by torturing him to some extent. What do you make of that?
I suspected that he was taking the fall for a lot of actions that many other people were involved in. Maybe he was trying to gain credit for it as well, but mainly I think in conjunction with his plea to try to release some of the other people in Gitmo that may not be guilty and so on, it sounded like, I'm going to take it all on me. The thing that was most interesting to me in that whole series of confessions is that he listed 30-something actions that he'd been involved in, and they were ranked to some extent by historical, in time, but also in importance. So he begins with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and he says then Al-Qaeda, then 9/11 from A to Z, and then number 3 is redacted. It's the only thing in the list that's redacted of his crimes. And it's number 3, right after 9/11. And I'm thinking, now, what is it? What did Al-Qaeda do or try to do that we don't know about?
Do you have any sense from your own reporting?
I haven't had a chance to report on it yet, but I'm very interested because it's right near the top of his list.
Interesting. The show is called My Trip to Al-Qaeda by Lawrence Wright at the Culture Project till
April 14th is our closing night.
Closing night. And also you should pick up The Looming Tower, his book about his reporting on Al-Qaeda. My Trip to Al-Qaeda, maybe your next show will be My Night with Dick and Liz.
It could be.
A little lighter in spirit and tone, and Lincoln Center should revisit your musical idea, I think.
Oh, we'll see.
Lawrence Wright, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
I've enjoyed it quite a lot. Thank you, guys.
Now, as Keith Oberman would say, no segue is possible. We close with the Volksbühne Yiddish Theater's version of The Pirates of Penzance.